back to the issue at hand. President Trump punted the next steps for the Iran deal to Congress. On Friday, he decertified the deal, and the Treasury Department introduced new sanctions on Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The president bashed the international agreement, but refrained from pulling out completely.
On the Iranian nuclear deal, why not just scrap it altogether now? You threatened to do so. Why not just end it now?
Because we'll see what happens over the next short period of time, and I can do that instantaneously. I like a two-step process much better.
You had said you were going to rip the Iran deal up, and you called it the worst ever.
Well, I may do that. The deal is terrible. So what we've done is, through the certification process, we'll have Congress take a look at it, and I may very well do that. But I like a two-step process much better.
Now there are essentially three actions that Congress can take. Doing nothing would essentially leave the deal intact and kick the decision back to the president. Congress could reimpose sanctions, which would violate the deal and essentially blow it up, or Congress could amend the nuclear review requirements. Senate Foreign Relations Chairman Bob Corker already introduced legislation to automatically reimpose sanctions on Iran if it hits a breakout period of being able to build a nuclear weapon in less than a year. Yesterday on Meet the Press, UN Ambassador Nikki Haley suggested changes will be what keeps the deal in place.
Is it better to keep this deal in place or get rid of it?
Well, I think right now you're going to see us stay in the deal, because what we hope is that we can improve the situation, and that's the goal. So I think right now we're in the deal to see how we can make it better, and that's the goal. It's not that we're getting out of the deal. We're just trying to make the situation better so that the American people feel safer.
But the Iranian foreign minister says the United States changing the deal would have a worldwide impact.
Nobody else would trust any U.S. administration to engage in any long-term negotiation, because the length of any commitment, the duration of any commitment from now on with any U.S. administration would be the reminder of the term of that president.
Are you thinking of any country in particular right now?
No, I'm thinking of the entire international community.
Not North Korea?
Well, including North Korea.
Joe, I know you were not a huge supporter of the deal, but what's the productive, is there one productive outcome of pulling out of the deal?
Well, first, it's hard to follow up the Iranian foreign minister giving lectures about people not being able to trust the United States' word. But that aside, I want to talk about the foreign policy side of this with Richard Haass and David Ignatius in a minute. But first, Mark Halperin, I've got to go to you, because this is perhaps the weakest leadership I've ever seen in my lifetime, in my 54 years, and I've been following politics for almost 50 of those 54 years, where you have a president who has three of the most significant issues before him: health care reform. He punts it to Congress, and then he goes, well, I'm not going to kill it. I'm not going to, he leaves it in limbo. And so it's dying on the vine. The most important foreign policy deal probably of the last 5 years, the Iran deal. It's the same thing. He won't go all the way. It's a halfway measure. So it's dying on the vine, but he doesn't have the courage to make the decision. And then, of course, you have DACA, something that at first he says he's going to deport the Dreamers, and then he says, no, I'm not. I'm going to leave it up to Congress. This president, it is now a trend where he doesn't have the courage to make any tough decisions. And so we're in a state of limbo on Dreamers. We're in a state of limbo on the Iran deal. We're in a state of limbo on health care.
Well, it's baffling on a lot of levels. First of all, on the first two issues, on health care and Iran, candidate Trump was pretty clear what he said he would do. I'm baffled by what his supporters think about his hedging. And I'm baffled by how the White House thinks they can overload the circuits of Congress on all this stuff when there's 15 other very big things, half of which must get done by the end of the year, or there's going to be a series of crises. So if there's a strategy here, it's hard to see what it is. And just based on the clips we just showed, it's hard to even understand what people within the administration think on these issues, because they too are all over the map.
David Ignatius, the weakness is extraordinary coming out of this White House. Of course, Truman's famous line, "The buck stops here," does not apply in this White House. You have 5 different foreign policy officials in the White House, sometimes spouting 5 different competing and contradictory foreign policy objectives. And then you have the president, again, punting, making a bold declaration, and then backing off. Why don't I add to health care, Iran, and DACA the transgender ban, something he tweeted out, and then, again, crossed by his own Secretary of Defense, and then the president backed off and did a halfway measure. This does send, again, a horrific message to our allies and our enemies.
Joe, I think the right way to describe this administration is the buck doesn't stop. The buck gets passed along. And I think one problem that we haven't talked about is that there's a damage to the United States from deferring these decisions, taking these halfway measures. For example, with the Iran deal, there is significant new concern among U.S. allies that we are a reliable partner. When you talk to European ambassadors, they say, we're used to having the United States as leader of this system. You helped us negotiate this deal. You know, now we're supposed to go to lobby Congress one way or the other on what Congress is supposed to do. They're confused. When you look at the consequences of what's been done on health care, for now, starving payment to some Affordable Care Act recipients, maybe down the road in a couple of weeks, having some compromise that continues funding for a short period of time under the Lamar Alexander, Patty Murray agreement. It's not as if people aren't paying a cost abroad and at home for these deferrals of decision. They are, and that's one thing that's really begun to bother me.
And Richard, we are talking to North Korea behind the scenes still. There is still a chance for a diplomatic solution, despite what the President of the United States is saying, if you listen to what Rex Tillerson and others in the administration have said. But if we do strike a deal with Iran, and then a year and a half later, tear up that deal or threaten to tear up that deal daily, having our commander-in-chief do that, who in the world in North Korea, even if they are sane and rational, and I suspect they are more sane and rational than a lot in the American media give them credit for being, they want a nuclear weapon because they want to be in the club and they don't want to happen to them what happened to Gaddafi. But why would they strike a deal with the United States of America when America's deal with Iran is tossed to the side when it's politically convenient?
Well, the short answer, Joe, is they wouldn't. This has been a real weekend of diplomatic malpractice. You have the Secretary of State saying we're going to continue talking to North Korea until the first bomb drops. You know, call me madcap, but I thought the job of the Secretary of State, among others, was to make sure the bombs don't drop. And as you say, you know, why would North Korea have a negotiation with us, and why would we want a second nuclear crisis at once? It just doesn't make sense. And then the Iran agreement, you know, Iran, the nuclear agreement is the one thing Iran is complying with. And if we want to improve it, the way to do it is not to unilaterally threaten to leave or to unilaterally amend it. We go back to the other signatories and we say, hey, this is a flawed agreement. In nearly 8 years, all limits, say, on centrifuges are going to disappear. Let's start talking about the follow-on. But let's start doing it in a way where we actually have a chance something could come from it. This is what we're seeing is not diplomacy. We're seeing theater. And it's short term. We really need a long-term foreign policy.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube. And make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.